I want to share with you one update about gerrymandering anyway, which I thought was interesting, something that's transpired since we talked about it last month. We talked about how there were several gerrymandering decisions that the Supreme Court actually came back in a favorable light, saying that these districts throughout the country need to be redone because they found them to be gerrymandered. Alabama was one where they found that a black majority congressional district was gerrymandered out, and they were told, no, that is not allowed, you have to go back and do it right. In the month that, since we've talked about it, Alabama is refusing. They're actually in open denial of a Supreme Court ruling. So this could get ugly. I mean, what recourse do you have as a nation where you reject and do not follow the rules of the Supreme Court? Well, you could be talking National Guard, you could be talking federal intervention. Things could get interesting as this continues to work its way back and forth in the Supreme Court. So let's keep an eye out on Alabama and see if they follow the rule of law. It seems like the rest of us have to follow the Supreme Court rulings when it's not in our favor. You know what? Alabama needs to step up and do the same. So I'm going to talk about two other rulings that came down recently from the Supreme Court that affect us and our democratic beliefs. One was a ruling that opened the doors to legal discrimination against the LGBTQIA plus community. It was a lawsuit called 303 Creative LLC versus Alenis. In summary, there was a Christian website designer. Her name was Lori Smith. She sued Colorado in 2016. It's 2023 now, so that just shows you how long these things take, 7 years, to work its way through the system. She filed a lawsuit about Colorado's anti-discrimination law. Normally, we think anti-discrimination is a good thing and should be codified. She files this lawsuit because it prohibits discrimination in public accommodations based on one's race, creed, disability, sexual orientation, or any other protective class. She said that violated her right to free speech under the Constitution's First Amendment. So she filed suit, and it went up to the Supreme Court, but there were some problems with this lawsuit. Once people got digging into it after the Supreme Court decision was rendered, number one, Smith, this website designer, she never actually faced any penalties for violating this law. Like, the law existed, she was not harmed by it because there were no fines levied against her, no judgments levied against her. She just proactively sued. So she sued, she refused a same-sex couple, and she sued on hypothetical grounds. She sued because she could have been fined or something else. So she went ahead and filed this lawsuit. Secondly, according to her court filings, a couple named Stuart and Mike, lovely couple, contacted her to create designs for their wedding, possibly including a website. Anybody know what the problem with this was? There was no such couple. The people she named in the lawsuit, Stuart, is not gay. He's married to a woman. Wasn't even aware he was named in this lawsuit. He's like, what the heck? He's getting all this recognition now. You know, hey, be proud, come on out, be loud. He's like, I'm not gay. Why is he in this lawsuit? So this lawsuit itself was filed on false information. Smith also claims that religious beliefs force her to oppose gay marriage, yet bearing false witness, lying in a lawsuit is perfectly fine. So those were problems. So what does this mean? Does this mean it's now open season to deny services to anyone who is LGBTQ? Well, they said that it does shield business owners from speaking against their conscience, but it does not, and this is what the legal experts say, they said it does not grant businesses widespread licenses to turn away LGBTQ couples. Instead, it carves out this small niche of a business type involving creative businesses so that they don't have to create and sell art that rejects what they believe their conscience to be. So it has to be a creative endeavor. It has to be something printed or displayed or artistic, a wedding cake even. But other services, like denying you a seat at a restaurant or denying car service, is not supposedly covered by this decision. But the fact is, a crack in the door still opens the door, right? So, and the fact that it came through under such false pretenses, the fact that the Supreme Court justices who ruled in favor of this web designer ignored all that, that's just sickening. That just means the rule of law wasn't applied, but rather the rule of somebody's fundamentalist beliefs. So that bothers me. A couple of things that came out there, of course, whenever a Supreme Court decision comes out, people love to take polls. The polls were interesting. One poll said that 60% of Americans say that business owners should be able to deny services if it conflicts with their LGBTQ plus beliefs. 60% of this nation said that's fine. Yet another poll from a different organization called Data for Progress found 65% of likely voters say that businesses should not be allowed to deny services based upon race, religion, disability, or sexual orientation. Conflicting polls. It's just the nature of the country we're in. It's the nature of the polling services. One's a conservative poller, the other is a more progressive poller. You're going to get different results, sometimes based on how the question is asked, based on who you ask it to. So I would say, as a nation, we are still very much divided on the subject, but it doesn't mean that both sides can be right. I truly believe that everybody should have the right to receive business if they're willing to pay for it, as long as they're engaged in activities that are within the law. You're engaged in, you want somebody to create a website for your illegal drug trade, right? That's one thing. It's an illegal business. But here, these are all legal activities. Same-sex marriage is allowed in this country, but so to deny service based upon your beliefs there is not right. The second topic is student loan debt relief. Just a quick show of hands. How many here have student loans that you're still paying off? I am. Wow. Well, don't wave it so hard that you throw your shoulder out. That's right. So when Biden was elected, one of the first things he came to office in and said, listen, as power of the president, I can forgive loans. If I loan you money, Michelle, $100, and I say, you know what, I forgive you that loan. You don't got to pay me back. That's fine, right? Forgiving loans is an okay thing to do. When I'm in church and we're saying the Lord's Prayer, we say, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Now, I'm sure it's got a much bigger theological impression or perspective, right, Bishop? But if you take it literally, forgive our debts, it's okay to forgive debts. So that's what President Biden did. He saw that over 45 million Americans have amassed $1.6 trillion in student loan debt. Most of them are under the age of 30. Average debt is around $30,000 per person. So Biden invoked a law called the HEROES Act, which was passed as part of pandemic relief, claiming the power to waive a portion of the debt. It wasn't all 1.6 trillion, mind you. It wasn't the full amount. It was a carve-out, a less than half of it, under this, claiming it was still part of a national emergency. But then 6 Republican-led states, Nebraska, Missouri, Arkansas, Iowa, Kansas, and South Carolina. Good old Alan Wilson, our Attorney General, filed suit to block this relief. Why? Why? How does it hurt South Carolina to have student loan debt forgiven? Why? Let's talk about some of the objections. Why not just make people pay the loans? You took out the loan, pay it. I've got a mortgage, I've paid for my car loans, you gotta pay what you owe. What's wrong with that? Well, there's a couple things that are different about student loans that many people are not aware of. First of all, college costs have soared in the last 20 years, far beyond inflation. Inflation's gone up 6% in recent years, 3% per year before that. College costs have gone up 10 to 20%. For some reason, college rates have gone way through the roof, far surpassing inflation. We also see that within our nation, the borrowers are distressed. 1 in 4 are delinquent or have defaulted already. We are not able to pay these loans back. African Americans and Latinos disproportionately have higher debt levels. So it affects those who are already at the most socioeconomic disadvantage. And then finally, student loans are difficult to discharge in bankruptcy. If you have a mortgage or a car loan or some other credit card debt, you can discharge those in bankruptcy pretty straightforward. Student loans, you got to clear a whole bunch more hurdles. It's harder to clear student loan debt for some reason. It's carved out and treated more different than any other type of loan. But this is the kicker. Did you know that interest on a student loan begins as soon as you take out that loan? While you're still a freshman in college at the age of 17 or 18, you've got no ability to pay the $20,000 you just took out. You can't start making payments on it right away. You don't have a job. You should be studying, playing football or basketball or something to kind of further your career and get you set up. But no, interest begins right away. Now, I got a 30-year mortgage on my house, and when I pay it off every month, most of it goes to interest. That's the biggest chunk, and it's going to take a decade, 2 decades, before I'm now paying off mostly principal and just a little bit of interest. They get their interest up front. So every month, every year that goes by where a student can't pay, that interest compounds like you're dealing with a mob boss who lent you money and is going to bust your knees if you don't pay back that excessive rate. That makes student loans much more different, because all that interest accrues when you are least able to pay that loan. 63% of borrowers who did make student loan payments during the pandemic still owed more than they borrowed. 63% owed more than they borrowed. You borrowed $30,000 for your tuition, you owe $37,000, $40,000 because of interest that accrued while you're in school. That's what makes the program unfair. And to help stimulate this economy, Joe Biden says, listen, this is where we can help. We're going to take this group of students who have jobs, who are professionals. Those of you who raised your hands, you're professionals. I know you. All right? You're making okay money for the most part. You're paying your bills. If you didn't have to be burdened with this debt, where would that money go? You buying more video games? Michelle, you buying the newest Xbox and newest PlayStation? You buying 3 of them? No. You're paying bills. You're paying child care. You're paying off things that stimulate our economy, like dining out maybe, or going to a movie here and there. You're not buying fancy Jaguars with money you should be paying to student loans. A recent survey said that students who now have to start paying the loans are going to have to cut back. They're going to have to cut back on hotels and restaurants and entertainment venues. They're going to have to cut back on appliances and hard goods that they would need for their house and repairs in their car, or hold off on buying a new car. And what's that going to do to our economy? Just going to drag it down. The government doesn't need this. All right? The government's been fine without these payments for the past couple of years so far. They'll get their money back as the economy continues to grow. They'll get their money back just fine. But to hit people hard now when they're just coming out of the pandemic and just recovering is just wrong. But still, the Supreme Court says, nope, this cancellation was an overreach of federal power. He cannot do it. So what next? Well, President Biden said that his administration would start a new effort to cancel college loans under a different law. That law is called the Higher Education Act of 1965. It gives the Secretary of Education the authority to compromise, waive, or release any right, title, claim, lien, or demand, however required, including any equity or right of redemption. I only understand half of those words, but that first part, the Secretary of Education has the power. So who is the Secretary of Education? Does anybody know who it is? One person knows, 2 people may know. Who was the previous one under Trump? It's scary that everybody knows Betsy DeVos. Only 2 people know the current Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona. So, your mission is, I want you to write a card to Miguel Cardona, sending him thank you cards, sending him flowers, sending him whatever he likes, find out about him. I want him to be happy. And then he's got the power to do something about the student debt. So that's where we go next. So, biggest picture, and this is what I'll wrap up with about the Supreme Court. Where do we go with this Supreme Court? According to one headline, in 370 days, the Supreme Court conservatives have dashed decades of abortion and affirmative action precedents. They've completely wiped out progress made over decades in just over a year. So what do we do about that? Well, some things are, first of all, keep your eye on them. What's coming up? In the fall, they're on recess right now, but coming up in September, October, they get back into business again. They start looking at some more court cases. Here's what's on their docket so far. Gun rights, because we don't have enough gun rights. Who's seeking gun rights? Domestic violence abusers. They're seeking gun rights. So apparently there's a law that says those who are under domestic violence restraining orders should not be allowed to have guns. Supreme Court's probably going to overturn that and say, nah, give them all the guns. Second Amendment. South Carolina has a case coming up about gerrymandering in the 1st District in Charleston and with Nancy Mace, Jim Clyburn. So there's a case that a federal court has found to be gerrymandered. They're taking it to the Supreme Court. Also, some further possible cuts into presidential powers, something called their ability to fund the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. That sounds like an important bureau. Consumer Financial Protection. I like that. Well, there are certain conservatives that don't like that because, you know what, you got to be pro-business ripoff somehow, and they want to be able to curb the SEC's ability to impose penalties for financial violations. So how about judicial reform? Well, one, we could certainly use ethics code for the Supreme Court. Maybe Supreme Court members should not be out there jet-setting and going on vacations paid by conservative lobbyists. Maybe we should expand the court. There's nothing sacred about the number 9. There's nothing in the Constitution or biblical law that says must be 9. It came about as 9 due to tradition because of the number of federal judicial circuits, but guess what? We have 13 of them now as the country has grown and our population has grown. So maybe 13 is the lucky number. Perhaps we should end lifetime appointments for federal judges. If you haven't noticed, the federal judges are getting younger. Right? Under Trump, they were bringing on 13-year-olds with conservative streaks to be federal judges, so they're going to be in there for a long, long time. So before we start robbing middle school to fit the bench, maybe we should put, long terms, 18-year terms. That sounds about fair. 18 years sounds good. There is a bill that has been submitted, but of course Republicans are not going to be for it. Until it becomes a mostly liberal Supreme Court, the Republicans won't be for limits on their powers. So there was an act in 2020 that tried to limit it. What can and should we do as you and me sitting here talking about it? Well, we need good judges appointed. And who appoints the judges? Well, that's the president. Nominates the judges, the senators vote on them, so it's incumbent upon us to put in a good president and good U.S. senators in order to make sure good judges are put on the Supreme Court. We also want to support the state attorneys general. The attorney generals of the states are the ones that file a lot of suits to the Supreme Court. Hence, the gerrymandering case in South Carolina has gone to the Supreme Court thanks to us. The affirmative action case went to the Supreme Court thanks to us. So we got to do something about these state lawmakers and have good people run for Attorney General of our state. With that, we're going to wrap things up with